Volunteer groups from churches and other organizations were assigned their areas of choice and had their own supervisors. General volunteers were assigned volunteer city management personnel as supervisors. One volunteer group of note was the Mennonite Disaster Assistance Team, who worked in the area continuously for 2 or 3 months, aiding in the cleanup and in the rebuilding. Every piece of debris large enough to be picked up was taken care of by the volunteers. Lawns were raked and in some cases even swept. Local merchants donated plastic bags for picking up small debris and hand tools for the volunteer forces. Food was donated to the area residents. Much of the debris had to be hand-carried from locations inaccessible to equipment. If equipment was available, drivers often gave special attention to residents and volunteers. Where trucks to haul debris were not available, piles were made at the curbside for later pickup. Some piles had to be made in open, accessible areas because of the distance to the street. Loading was done as the crews could get to it. The hauling to selected areas was continuous during daylight hours. 5 burn sites were selected in open areas. Special permission had to be obtained from local, state, and federal officials for open burning in order to reduce the debris to a variable residue in the shortest time possible. Haul routes were established and traffic routed through other streets where possible. The piles of debris were built and consolidated. Burning was started. Fire tending with large bulldozers and occasionally fire division equipment was a critical item. As the piles burned down, more debris was hauled in. Truckload after truckload arrived at the 5 sites. The National Guard tended the fire at People Park. In order to achieve complete burning, the debris had to be turned over and over. As the fires burned down, many pieces of unburnable metal became visible. The remaining metals and ashes had to be buried or hauled to a landfill site. Burned sites had to be cleaned and restored. Even as the debris was being cleaned up, the rebuilding had started. With debris removed, residents could now see what was left of their home and better make a decision about rebuilding. The remains of many houses were structurally sound enough to start rebuilding with little additional demolition. However, some structures were unsafe and had to be condemned. Notices were posted on the unsafe buildings. The path of destruction became less visible every day. Within 10 days, the very scars of the tornado were starting to disappear. Papers, books, and records were salvaged from the Westgate School in preparation for demolition. Necessary demolition was done by homeowners and rebuilding started. There were a total of 572 residential dwellings heavily damaged or destroyed, and 1,886 sustained light to moderate damage, with an estimated loss of $13,700,000. This does not include personal effects or vehicles. There were 55 heavily damaged or destroyed commercial or industrial buildings, and 121 sustained light to moderate damage. This loss amounted to $16,594,000. This does not include vehicles or inventories. The total damage cost was $30,294,000 for structures alone. This does not include public property, inventories, vehicles, or personal effects. There were many other happenings in the community response to this disaster, but time does not permit their inclusion in this presentation. Although the total community response was outstanding, there were a number of contributing factors. The key individuals primarily responsible for the conduct of operations were all in the city, and none of them were killed or injured by the tornado. The National Guard Armory remained intact due to a change in the storm track. The police and fire communication system and the Public Works Control Center remained intact because the east storm chose not to release the tornado it held in its bowels. Coordination, due to the separation of the many control centers and the overloaded telephone circuits, was at best poor. Had the suggested possible events occurred, the response to this disaster could have been a very different story.